Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias' stories. We now return to The Inner Darkness by Jørn Lier Horst, translated by Anne Bruce. Chapter 28. The new interview room was simply furnished. 2 chairs with a small table between them and a camera on the wall. Wisting drew his chair closer to the table. "Tell me about Tom Kerr," he said. "I don't know where he is," the woman opposite replied. The overweight woman's face was pale and pasty. She looked both confused and scared as her eyes flitted around the room. "How do you know him?" Wisting asked. "I don't know him," Lone Melberg protested. "Not really." Wisting was searching for the right words to get the conversation moving. "How did you make contact then?" he persevered. The woman opposite hesitated. "I wrote to him," she explained. "In prison?" She nodded. "Everyone needs somebody," she answered. "Somebody who won't condemn you for what you've done. I offered to be there for him, as a friend." "But you didn't know him from earlier?" "No." Wisting had no desire to provoke her and refrained from asking for any further explanation as to why she had made contact. He knew of other prisoners convicted of murder who had received flattering attention from unknown women. The reasons could be complicated and convoluted. Some were Christians keen to cure or convert. Others women who wanted to play the role of mother, and some few others even wrote what they could only be described as love letters. The sender usually had an unbalanced emotional life, but the total focus they might receive from a long-term prisoner gave them a feeling of much sought control. "You also visited him," he pointed out. The woman nodded. "When did you last visit him?" Wisting probed, even though he knew the answer. "On Monday." 2 days ago, in other words. Lone Melberg nodded again. "Tell me about that visit," Wisting said. She shrugged. "It was just the same as usual." "What does that mean?" "He asked me how I was, what I'd been doing since the last time." Wisting remained silent while he waited for her to say more. "He was interested in that sort of thing. He showed concern, always asked how my father was and how my daughter was getting on. My father had a stroke this summer. He's gone into a care home." "You told him about your daughter?" Wisting asked, feeling a tinge of annoyance. "She's in the last year of high school," Lone Melberg answered. "It's not been so easy with friends and so on. He's been concerned about her. I have too. And it's nice to be able to talk to someone you know won't pass things on." Wisting decided against pursuing this. "Did he tell you anything about himself?" he asked, changing tack. "We just talked about day-to-day things, about a TV series we were both following, and about a book he had read." "Did he tell you also he's also confessed to killing Tara Norum?" Wisting ploughed on. Lone Melberg swallowed hard as she curled one hand around the glass of water on the table, but she did not take a drink. "No," she replied. "Did you know he was coming out of prison for a site visit yesterday?" "We never spoke about things like that," Melberg answered. Wisting continued along these lines, unearthing further details about their conversations and meetings in prison. Nothing of what Lone Melberg told him had any relevance for the case, and he decided to move on. "What were you doing in Larvik last night?" he asked in a slightly sharper tone of voice. "What do you mean?" "You left home at 17:23 yesterday," Wisting spelled out to her. "At 18:56, you tried to drive into the area where Tom Kerr was last seen, but you were turned back at the barrier. You drove around all night in the locality where we had reason to believe he was hiding." He used these exact timings to create the impression that they had more detailed knowledge than was actually the case. This would make it more difficult for Lone Melberg to give an evasive answer. "I was looking for him," she admitted. "What do you mean?" "I heard it on the news, that he'd escaped, so I went down to the place where it had happened." "Why did you do that?" "To look for him," Lone Melberg repeated. "The police, you see. You had tried to shoot him before. I don't know. I thought that if I found him and managed to talk to him, then it would work out. Then it would be okay." "Have you been in this area before?" Wisting asked her. She shook her head. "No, I used my phone to find my way around." Wisting got her to repeat all of this again, about how she had heard on the radio about Tom Kerr's escape, that she had made up her mind to try to help him, and how she had driven around all night long. She seemed so naive that her explanation might just be credible. He put pressure on her until she found herself backed into a corner, just where he wanted her to be when he came out with the crucial questions. "Has Tom Kerr ever asked you to do any favors for him?" "What sort of favors?" "Have you ever brought letters or any other kind of message in and out of the jail for him?" Lone Melberg did not answer, and Wisting took this as an admission of sorts. "What type of message?" he asked. "Only once," she replied. "What was it about?" "A letter." "When was this?" She did not answer his direct question. "It was a private letter," she said instead. "He didn't want the wardens or anybody else to read it." "Who was it addressed to?" "A friend," she swallowed audibly. "Someone who'd been a good friend of his a long time ago. He was hoping that he'd come and visit him. It was a thick letter. He had written a number of pages." "Do you remember what he was called?" Lone Melberg nodded. "It happened twice," she said in an undertone. "The first time a month ago, and then again last week." "And you remember the name?" She nodded. "His name was Theo. I wrote down his name and address before I posted it. I have it at home. I thought I could get in touch with him and tell him how Tom was, that he needed a visit." "Theo," Wisting repeated. "What else?" "It wasn't a Norwegian name," Lone Melberg explained. "It sounded German, but he lives in Oslo. I have a note of it in my kitchen." Chapter 29. A number of them sat around the conference table after watching the video of Lone Melberg's interview. Wisting sat at the head of the table. The Kerr inquiry crossed the borders of several police districts, but he had been allocated the task of coordinating and leading the work of finding him. Tom Kerr had escaped on his watch. "There's no one called Theo or Theo in the database," Semmelman said. "I've tried different ways of spelling it." "She said his surname sounded German or something," Hammer pointed out. "That could be your suspect. The Eastern European you never managed to track down." Wisting scanned the comprehensive relationship chart. "We'll soon have his full name and address," he said. "We shall get ourselves ready for that." He turned to face Christine Tiss. "We'll need a decision about moving in there." The police lawyer agreed. "That won't be a problem." Wisting took out his phone to give advance warning to headquarters in Oslo. "How far have the undercover detectives got?" he asked as he searched for the number. The undercover officers who had followed Lone Melberg's movements in the past 24 hours were now on their way back to Hoksund to enter her apartment and find the note she had written with the name and address of the person with whom Tom Kerr had communicated. "They can't be far away now," Stiller said. He sat with his phone in his hand, as if waiting for an answer at any second. Pushing his chair away from the table, Wisting moved off from the others so that he could speak to the person in charge in Oslo. He introduced himself briefly, explained the situation, and was given the direct number of the team leader who would provide assistance when they were ready to enter the apartment. Torenborg slipped into the conference room and closed the door behind her. "They found the boat," she announced. "It was lying underwater near Ringhaugstranda, outside Tonsberg." "He sunk it then," Hammer said. "It was one of the rescue boats that located it," Torenborg went on. "The police boat is on its way now. I have the coordinates." Overhiddle, already logged on to the large screen computer, took the note and keyed in the position. Beep boop, beep boop, beep boop. It took them to the western edge of the Oslo fjord between Tonsberg and Asgardstrand. The map itself told them nothing, and Hiddle changed to a satellite image of the same area. This showed what looked like a rocky shoreline and dense forest further inland. "No buildings," Stiller commented. "He must have driven onto the pebbles and knocked a hole in the bottom of the boat," Hammer said. Ove Hiddle moved the cursor on the screen. "There's a track here," he said, drawing a line through the trees, almost all the way down to the fjord. "He could have had a car waiting there, or been picked up," Stiller suggested. "We can get the data from nearby toll stations," Wisting nodded. "Zoom out," he said, in order to pick out the discovery site in relation to Efton. Hiddle did as requested, and they saw that the site was a few kilometers south of the oil refinery at Slagentagen. Hammer reckoned it was 30 nautical miles from there down to Efton. "It's taken him about an hour and a half," he calculated. Adrian Stiller's phone buzzed. "Theo Derman," he read aloud. He held up the phone screen showing a picture of the post-it note on which Lone Melberg had written the name and address. "Theo Derman, Anton Brex, Way, 720041, Oslo." Hiddle shifted the screen to criminal records and keyed in the name, but it brought 0 results. He opened the population register, but the name was not listed there either. "Foreigner," Hammer commented. "Clean sheet, in Norway at least." Hiddle tried the intelligence register, but that was equally unsuccessful. Semmerman tried the surname in the database. "No Dremen in here," he said. "Check the address," Wisting requested. "Find out who else lives there." "That 0041 postcode must be somewhere in Sagene," Semmelman said. "There are a lot of high-rise blocks there." The address yielded no results. "Postcode 0041 is not in use," Hiddle informs him as he tapped a few more keys. "There's an Anton Brex Way in Fredrikstad. That's the only place in Norway where one exists, but the house numbers don't go as high as that." "What a fucking shambles," Hammer said. "Try to Google him, or try Facebook." Ove Hiddle copied the name from the screen and pasted it into Google. The highest ranked result was for a German children's book called Theo und der Mann im Ohr. Theo and the Man in His Ear. Hammer groaned. What the hell is this? Is there no one in the whole world whose name is Theo Derman?" Check with the postal service, Wisting said. They must have a listing. After all, they've delivered 2 letters to him. Nodding, Hammer took note of this assignment. If Lone Melberg's to be believed, he added. They rattled through a number of tasks and shared out other assignments before Wisting closed the meeting. Chairs scraped on the floor as they all got to their feet and went about their business. Adrian Stiller packed away his papers and laptop in a case, slung it over his shoulder and approached Wisting. I'll come with you to the prison, he said. Wisting accepted his offer. I just have to go home and get Line first, he said. I have to give her a lift. Her car is parked at your place, remember? Chapter 30. It had started raining again, and Line was sitting in her basement workroom, listening to the water gurgling in the downpipes from the roof. It occurred to her that Amelie needed new Wellington boots. She had outgrown the ones that she had, and her puddle suit was also getting too tight for her. A car tooted outside. Boop, boop. And she knew it must be her father. A quarter of an hour ago, he had sent her a message asking her to get ready to leave. She logged off, got to her feet, and checked the kitchen window. She saw that Adrian Stiller was also in the car. Her father tooted his horn again impatiently. Boot, boot. Shrugging on her jacket, Line went out and clambered into the back seat. Hi, she greeted the 2 men in front. Stiller turned around to face her and smiled. Her father cast a glance in the rear-view mirror. Have you remembered to bring your car keys? He asked. She nodded, but checked in her bag to be on the safe side. Is there any news? She asked. Wisting shook his head. What was that I heard about an action that took place this morning? We went into a summer cabin on the south side of Eftingel, her father explained, but he wasn't there. We found your sound equipment though, Stiller added. Your mic and transmitter. You'll get them back soon. So he was hiding in a cabin down there? Line said. For how long? Not long at all. What does that mean? He got away in a stolen boat, probably even before the helicopter was brought in, Stiller replied. The boat's been found outside Tonsberg. All trace of him ends there. Stiller was more willing to talk than her father. She liked that. It made her feel included. So what are you going to do now? She asked. Follow up tip-offs, was her father's answer. Line looked away and out of the window. His response annoyed her. It told her nothing and was of the type that journalists in the front row of a press conference were used to receiving. Have you checked the people he had contact with in prison? She asked after a pause. Visitors and such like? We're working on that, he said. Line shifted in his seat. Did you manage to speak to the chief investigator yesterday then? She asked. Yes. What did he say? Wisting drove out onto the E18 and accelerated. He told me about the work they'd done in the search for the accomplice, he replied. Do they have any suspects? Her father met her eye in the mirror again. We're in the middle of an active case, Line, he answered. You'll just have to cool your jets and wait until it's all over. With a sigh, Line put her hand to her forehead. I'm no longer a journalist, she said, leaning forward. I'm asking because it affects me. I was there when Tom Kerr did a runner. I still have a sore head from the explosion. I can't just wait until it's over. I won't be able to rest until he's safely back in jail. Neither of the men said anything further, and her father turned up the volume on the car radio. As the wipers scraped across the windscreen, Line shook her head and flopped back in the seat. Where is this cabin you're investigating then? she asked. "Surely that can't be a secret. What's the owner's name?" Adrian Stiller turned halfway round towards her. "We have pictures from the operation this morning," he replied. "I can try to get them released," he smiled. "When this is over and done with," he added. Chapter 31. The lock buzzed. Wisting pushed the grated door open and walked through the outer perimeter of the prison all the way up to the massive brick building. Someone shouted something from one of the windows on the second floor. Some sort of confused message about rights and justice. The prison governor stood at the top of the steep stone stairs, waiting to greet them. A prison guard recorded the names and they handed over the police ID badges in exchange for visitor passes. They then headed for the prison governor's office. "We closed down the whole section when we learned that Kerr had escaped," he told them. "Of course, the inmates have found out about it through TV and radio broadcasts, but they haven't had the chance to talk to one another about it. Is there anyone who might know something?" "Tommy Holland is still here," the prison governor replied. "He was the one who started the ball rolling, if you remember." "The informant?" "Yes, he's probably the one most likely to have something to say. Have you spoken to him previously?" Wisting shook his head. Stiller had not met him earlier, only read the reports in which he recounted what Tom Kerr had confided to him about the killing of Taran Norum. "Don't worry about his eye, by the way," the prison governor warned them. "There's more wrong on the inside of his head than outside it." "What's wrong with his eye?" "He was born with an empty eye socket. He used to use a glass eye, but not anymore. We need to talk to Kerr's contact warden too," Wisting said. "Molander. He's been off sick for a few days, but he's back at work now. He's here today." The prison governor leaned over the intercom system to request Frederick Molander's presence at a meeting in his office. "Molander can accompany you," the prison governor said. A man in his 30s wearing a crumpled uniform shirt appeared at the door. The prison governor introduced Wisting and Stiller and asked him to answer any questions they might have. "They want to see Kerr's cell," he rounded off. "Can you take them there, please?" "Of course." The guard produced a bunch of keys and led the way to the custodial section. Wisting could feel a strong sense of the deprivation of liberty as they walked. Metal doors that were unlocked and relocked, pale fluorescent light tubes, and long grey corridors. "How long have you been Tom Kerr's contact warden?" Wisting asked. Molander turned his head and cast a glance behind him. "Ever since he came here," he answered. "More than 4 years." "You know each other well, then?" "That's the idea," Molander replied. "Good relations between inmates and wardens have a positive effect when it comes to security and reduce the level of conflict." They moved through a common room with sitting areas and a kitchenette and on into another corridor. "It's intended as a stable point of contact for prisoners throughout the stay here," Molander went on, "to be a support and someone to talk to." There was a sermonizing tone in his manner of speaking, but Wisting ignored that. "What did you talk about?" he asked instead. "Mostly practical details about being here, guidance and orientation, helping with various applications, getting him on to a number of courses and programs, planning for his future." "And what plans did Kerr have for his future?" Frederick Molander stopped at an unmarked cell door. "No matter what they're convicted of or how long it is until their release, we have to work towards rehabilitation and transformation," he said as he inserted the key in the lock. Somewhere further along the corridor, someone shouted something from one of the cells, but it was impossible to decipher what was said. "My most important job is to be present," Molander continued, turning the key slowly, "to try to be a positive factor in their daily life." The door bolt shot back and a massive metal door swung open. The room inside measured about 2 by 5 meters and contained a bed, desk, shelves crammed with ring binders, a cupboard, a wash basin, a TV, and a cork notice board. Stepping inside, Wisting walked to the window and peered out between the bars. The deserted exercise yard was surrounded by a 7-meter-high perimeter wall, behind which spread out a fertile forest landscape beneath a blue-grey sky. Stiller read a quote from one of the notes on the notice board. "Laws are like telegraph poles. You can't jump over them, but you can get round them." Wisting approached the desk. A pile of different textbooks sat on it. Philosophy, psychology, a book of facts about criminal law, and a couple of self-help books. He sat down and pulled on a pair of latex gloves before opening the top drawer. It contained a few CDs, writing materials, envelopes, and stamps. A folder contained a letter from the Norwegian Correctional Service in connection with his prison sentence, while another folder held correspondence with other public bodies. Wisting put back the folders and lifted the writing pad. There was nothing on it, but he could make out the outlines of what had been written on the previous sheet. He held the pad up at an angle towards the light from the window to see more clearly. It looked like a formal letter layout. He saw the impression of a sender and recipient address, and the name Tom Kerr was clear to see. The recipient appeared to be Ila Prison. The letter itself began with a heading that had been underlined forcefully. He laid the writing pad aside to take with him. In the next drawer, there was a bundle of letters held together with an elastic band. He pulled it off and peered at the letter on top. It was from Lone Melberg and dated 3 weeks previously. She thanked him for the visit and wrote that she understood how difficult it could be to open up about your feelings. "For most of my life, I haven't been emotionally present," she wrote in round letters, "so I know how it is for you. I wasn't brought up to show my feelings either, but when you hold your feelings in check for long enough, in the end they overflow. I hope I can be the one to make your dam burst." It continued in a similar vein. Nothing in the correspondence between Tom Kerr and Lone Melberg could be interpreted as preparation for an escape attempt. "Here!" Adrian Stiller exclaimed. He was rummaging through the cupboard and had found a note. "Theo Derman," he read out loud as he held it up to Wisting. This was the same name and address as on the letters Lone Melberg had talked about having smuggled out. Wisting turned to the contact warden, who was leaning against the door frame. "Is that a name you recognize?" he asked. "Theo Derman?" Frederick Molander shook his head. Wisting peered into the cupboard where the note had been found. "Anything else?" he asked. "Only this," Stiller replied, placing the note in an evidence bag. Wisting concentrated on the desk again and dropped the bundle of letters from Lone Melberg into a smaller bag. The third drawer contained items bought in the prison shop. Bags of boiled sweets, packets of biscuits, potato crisps, chocolate, peanuts, and cocoa powder. The shelf above the desk was filled with ring binders stuffed with documents from the criminal cases brought against Kerr and letters from his lawyer. The last one was a copy of a letter to an insurance company about their failure to pay compensation for the fire at a small holding in Ostmarka. The rubbish bin beneath the desk was empty. There was nothing behind the cork notice board on the wall or the mirror above the wash basin. They upended the bed, leafed through magazines and browsed through the books. The search was fruitless. Wisting turned to face Molander. Was there anything he said or did that in hindsight might be relevant to his escape? Molander shook his head. Not really. We discussed the possibility of day release and parole when his minimum sentence period is over. I was honest with him, spoke my mind and said that if he didn't demonstrate personal change, he would probably have his sentence extended. I think that made him believe he ought to confess to the third murder, that it would be important for him to be able to move on. Wisting crouched down and looked under the bed. All he could see was a pair of slippers. He pulled them out and checked that there was nothing in them. Then he rose to his full height again and looked at Molander. Tell me about the telephone routines, he said. What do you mean? If Tom Kerr wanted to make a phone call to someone on the outside, how would that happen? He can phone out to anyone he likes, but he has only 20 minutes of phone time a week, Monday to Friday. He has to use a wall-mounted phone beside the guardroom. All private conversations are monitored. There was also surveillance on his letters. Wisting nodded. All the guards knew about that? He asked. Of course, Molander replied in a self-assured, almost disdainful voice. What about his phone regime? Stiller asked. Was it followed strictly? Frederick Molander avoided the question. Conversations with the police or his lawyer are not included in his phone time allowance, he explained instead, and they are not taped either. But is it possible for inmates to obtain extra phone time, for example, when he's meeting a social worker or a care worker? Would he be able to get permission to use their office phone, for example? Molander shook his head. Not for personal conversations, no. But the escape was well planned, Stiller interjected. He must have communicated with someone about it. Visitors, Molander suggested, either directly or by someone carrying messages in and out. Wisting approached the window again. The rain had formed puddles outside the exercise yard. They knew that Lorna Melberg had smuggled out 2 letters, but the level of detail in the escape plan demanded two-way communication. So far she had denied bringing anything in for him. The one you should check is that lawyer of his, Molander went on. Klaus Tank? It wouldn't be the first time he moved beyond his role as a defense counsel, Molander said. Wisting did not pass comment on this rejoinder. If the defense lawyer had operated as a courier, then Tom Kerr would not have needed to use Lorna Melberg to post letters for him. We're done, he said, taking one last look around the cell. Can we have a chat with the informant? Tommy Hornland, Molander replied, nodding his head, is going through a bad patch. Wisting left the cell with Stiller following at his heels. How do you mean? He is borderline psychotic, but the doctor is reluctant to increase his medication. Not yet, at least. He closed the cell door and locked it carefully. You can wait in the visitors' room. Chapter 32. It felt like a waste of time to travel into Oslo merely to pick up her car and drive home again. As Line drove out of the backyard at the Kripos building, she looked up at Ingar Holm's number. He was the development manager at September Film and a contact person for the documentary project. They had spoken several times the previous evening. He had gained access to her film footage, but was eager to meet her in person. He cancelled another appointment and arranged access to an editing suite so that they could watch the recording together. A quarter of an hour later, Line was parking in Nederland. Horm met her in reception. He was about 10 years older than her and had worked on numerous TV productions, everything from reality shows to major drama series. Nina Gollo will join us, he said, ushering her into a corridor. She hasn't seen the footage. Line had only said hello to Nina Gollo once in the past. She was the person at September Film who would have administrative responsibility once a final decision had been made about the production. She was already seated in the editing suite and leapt up from her chair when they came in. "Quite a development," she said, shaking Line's hand. Her voice was husky and hoarse, but carried authority. "When can we have official access to the material?" "That might take a long time," Line said as she sat down. The arrangement was that it would happen once a legal judgment is in place against Tom Kerr. That could take a while yet. First, they have to find him. Nina Gollo looked unhappy with the answer. "I've got a good relationship with the leader of the investigation from Kripos," Line went on. "Adrian Stiller. He has promised me pictures from the unsuccessful operation in the early hours of this morning. Ingar Holm played the recording from their arrival at Efton. This would be the 6th time Line had viewed it." "Will there be a problem with impartiality regarding your father?" Gollo asked. "After all, he's heavily involved in the case." Line shook her head emphatically. "The problem is that he doesn't tell me anything," she answered. "I think there's a lot more going on than what's emerging from the news reports." "Like what?" "Something to do with the other one. He must be the person behind it all, who has organized the whole escape." Gollo nodded thoughtfully. "Tom Kerr acted as a decoy," Line went on. "Bringing him out of prison might well have coaxed out the other one. I don't know if the police included that area in their calculations. I don't know if the police included that idea in their calculations, but there's definitely something going on behind the scenes here." On screen, they watched as Tom Kerr fell for the first time. None of them spoke as he got to his feet and walked on. When he fell again, Line asked for the footage to be replayed in slow motion. They saw Kerr wipe the blood from a cut on his face and lick it from his fingers. "There," she said, pointing to the tiny key inside his mouth. "Fucking brilliant," Gollo commented. "What are the police doing today? Is there any news?" "They brought in the chief investigator from the 2 cases Kerr was already convicted of," Line replied. "Right now, they're at the prison talking to the wardens and other inmates." "It's crucial that you stay close," Gollo said. "Document everything and gather as much information as possible." "Here it comes," Ingar Holm prompted them. Tom Kerr had started to run. Nina Gollo focused on the TV screen, waiting for the explosion. The flash of light made her swear again. The camera fell to the ground as soil and sand drizzled down. The blonde policewoman appeared in the picture. They heard Wisting's voice ask her if she was uninjured before ordering her to remain on the spot, while the camera showed the obviously wounded policewoman, a sister colleague. "Who's the girl?" Nina Gollo demanded. "I don't know," Line replied. "She hasn't had a permanent job for long. I spoke to her in the minibus on her way from the prison." On screen now, the police dog was following Tom Kerr into the woods. "Rewind," Nina Gollo asked. "To the girl." Ingar Holm complied and froze the image when the policewoman was closest to the camera. Her long hair was tied back in a thick plait over one shoulder. Her face was grubby and speckled with cuts and grazes. "She's attractive," Nina Gollo commented. "Find out who she is. If anyone is going to talk to camera about what happened, then it should be her." Chapter 33. Wisting stood at the window in the visitor's room and looked out at the rain. A crow strutted around in the exercise yard, pecking at the ground. They had been waiting for Tommy Holland, for the past 10 minutes. Wisting's phone was still with the guard in the lobby. If there were to be a development in the case, they would not learn about it until they came out again. The door opened and Wisting turned round. Tommy Hornland was a tall, thin man with a sharp nose and tousled hair. He had stabbed his mother to death and had also been found guilty of the attempted murder of his father and sister. Frederick Molander sat down on a wooden chair beside the door while the prisoner plumped down on the settee. He scowled at them with his one eye, and there was something distrustful, but at the same time distant, in his gaze. In the space where his other eye should have been, his eyelid hung down, and the surrounding skin was wrinkled. "It's okay," Wisting said, addressing the prison guard. "You can wait outside." It looked as if he was thinking of protesting, but then he stood up and made his exit. Wisting explained who they were. The leather settee squeaked as Hornland twisted and turned. Settee. A long seat with a back. A medium-sized sofa with arms and a back. Settee. Wisting explained who they were. The leather settee squeaked as Hornland twisted and turned. "I knew it," he said, and began to rock back and forth. Wisting glanced across to Stiller, who shrugged. Tommy Hornland was clearly in a different mental state now than when the investigators from the Cold Cases group had spoken to him. "Knew it the whole time," he added. "What did you know?" Stiller asked. "You should have realized that he was going to do a runner," he said, with a noise that sounded like a sniff. "Everybody knew it." "We took every precaution," Stiller commented. "Everybody knows that a hungry lion is going to attack," Hornland said. "Everybody knew that Tom Kerr was going to escape." "It was very well planned," Stiller continued. "He must have received help." Tommy Hornland crossed his arms on his chest. "Yes, from the other one," he said. "The guy who has always helped him." "Did he ever talk to you about his sidekick?" "No one knows who he is," Hornland said, without actually answering Wisting's question. He placed one leg over the other and leaned to one side on the settee. "He's used you, just like he used me," he said, swinging his foot. "I should have cottoned onto it before. His confession was false. Not false in the sense of not being true, because he did murder that girl, but the reason he started running off at the mouth to me about it was that he wanted to break out." Tommy Hornland tapped his finger on his forehead, as if to say that he had worked out how it all fitted together. "He didn't only talk to me about it, but to quite a few folk in here. Everybody, to be honest. He reckoned that someone would eventually go to the guards with it. I just happened to be the one. You wouldn't have gone along with it if he'd approached you directly and suddenly confessed. So he used me. And you snatched at the bait. You took him out of here on a wild goose chase." Even though he was talking breathlessly, there was something rational and logical about his reasoning. Stiller said something about it being easy to be wise after the event and repeated his mantra that the escape was well planned. "He spent a long time on it," Hornland said. "Years, in fact." "How can he have done that from inside prison?" Wisting asked. "He must have talked to someone on the outside, received help." Tommy Hornland glowered at the door with his one eye. "The other one," he repeated. "His pal, who has always helped him with everything." How would you have gone about it if you wanted to communicate with someone on the outside? Stiller asked. Without the wardens finding out? Send messages, Hornland replied, glancing at the door again, as if desperate to leave the room. It's easier for some people than for others. Much easier. Who is it easier for? Loads of people. Who then? Tommy Hornland rolled his head and fixed his one eye on Wisting. It's easier for the ones who have a lawyer, he answered. Lawyers come and go without hindrance, in and out all the time. I don't have a lawyer. I haven't had one for 12 years. I don't have a girlfriend either, or a brother. I do have a sister, but she doesn't come here. Wisting adopted a thoughtful expression. He nodded sympathetically and tried to steer the conversation onto something that might provide them with relevant information. But Tommy Hornland's responses grew increasingly vague. In the end, Wisting got to his feet and knocked on the door to indicate that the interview was over. Tommy Hornland stayed behind in the visitor's room while Wisting and Stiller were escorted back to the main entrance, where they retrieved their police badges and mobile phones. Wisting had 11 missed calls, 2 of them from a Semmelman and 2 from the Chief of Police. The rest were numbers he had not stored, most likely from journalists. He called the police chief as they walked through the heavy rain to their car. Any news? She asked. No, he replied, going on to explain that he had just left the prison. Internal Affairs wants to speak to you, the police chief said. They're sending an investigator down to Larvik. You must make yourself accessible to them. Chapter 34. We should talk to Floyd too, Stiller said, as soon as they were seated in the car. The befriender from the Red Cross. He lives near Bekistua. Wisting glanced up at the imposing prison building before driving out of the car park. Do you think he'll be at home now? He asked. According to the paperwork, he's an investor and works from home, draws up financial analysis, buys and sells shares on the net. We can but try. He found the address and typed it into the sat-nav. It was almost on their way back to Vestfold. They drove south, skirting a golf course. The houses were scattered, but gradually grew more numerous, and soon they found themselves in a residential area of large villas with extensive gardens. The GPS led them into a cul-de-sac. Number 32, Stiller said, pointing at a white-painted detached house with glazed roof tiles. The curved wrought iron gate was open wide, and Wisting turned into the paved courtyard. There was no car parked outside, but it looked as if there was a large garage beneath the house. He lives alone, Stiller said. Never been married, no children. Wisting remained seated behind the steering wheel as he gazed at the grand residence. Tall, round pillars loomed on either side of the entrance. Why on earth would someone who lives here visit a convicted killer in prison? He wondered. Let's go and ask, Stiller suggested, stepping out. The double entrance doors were painted black and looked impressive. The doorbell sounded like a clock chime, and Wisting almost expected a maid or a butler to open the door. The man who did materialize was in his 30s, and his clothes and appearance were not entirely in keeping with the style of the house. His thin, stringy hair lay flat on his head above his pale complexion. His pointed chin was slightly lopsided, and he had 1 large and 2 smaller warts on his left cheek. Floyd too? Wisting inquired. Yes, that's me. Wisting had envisaged a man in a suit, but Floyd too was dressed in well-worn joggers and a t-shirt spattered with coffee stains. We're from the police, Stiller explained, It's about Tom Kerr." "I see," Tew replied, and went on to mention that he had seen Wisting on the TV news. "I've been expecting you, really." They were led through to a workroom on the opposite side of the house. A huge horseshoe-shaped desk was covered in computers, 2 of which were in use, the screens showing constantly changing stock exchange figures. A glimmer of daylight spilled through a gap in the curtains. There were no chairs for visitors besides the desk, so Tew had to go into an adjacent room to fetch a couple of dining chairs. "You featured on the list of Tom Kerr's visitors," Wisting began. "How often do you visit him?" "Once or twice a month," Tew replied. "How long has that been going on?" "For nearly 5 years. I have 3 prisoners I visit regularly. It takes me 1/4 of an hour to drive over there." Stiller leaned forward a little. "Can I ask why you do that?" he queried. Tilting back in his chair, Floyd Tew picked absent-mindedly at the largest of 3 warts on his cheek. "The intention is to do something useful to society," he replied. "What I do here is just about numbers and money." He waved his hand towards the computer screens. "The people I meet are all in the same profession. We talk about the same things. As a befriender, I am exposed to different ideas, a completely different perspective on life." "What do you talk about?" "It varies, but often about philosophy and ethical questions, about freedom, for example." "Freedom?" Tew smiled. "In the beginning, human beings are free to choose," he replied. "We can even choose to commit illegal acts that break the norms and rules of society. But then we must also take the consequences of the choices we've made, and we can't avoid those consequences. Many of the prisoners in Ila are there because they've made the wrong choices, but do human beings really have free will?" He left the question hanging in the air, as if he wanted to hear the 2 police officers' opinions on this. Then he shook his head and let them know what he himself thought about it. "What we may believe to be independent choices are really the unavoidable results of previous events," he said. "Just as you can predict that a hungry lion is going to hunt his prey, you can also predict what a human being will choose if you're familiar with the whole of his previous history." Wisting recognized the reference to the lion. "Do you also visit Tommy Hornland?" he asked. "So, you've spoken to him too," Tew said, smiling. "We've just been to Ila," Wisting answered. "Freedom can be regarded from various aspects," Tew went on. "Freedom of action is usually regarded as the opportunity to do whatever we want. But the greater our freedom of action, the greater responsibility we also have to take. Therefore, it's possible to turn this on its head and say that absolute freedom means being totally devoid of responsibility, incapacitated. Viewed from that perspective, freedom can also be experienced even when strapped to a restraint bed in Ila. Whoever is lying there tied up has no opportunity to choose. He has no responsibility to take. He can only lie there, restrained. He is completely submissive. For Tommy Hornland, that is the best form of freedom." The thought of how Tom Kerr and his accomplice had chained up their victims crossed Wisting's mind, but he passed no comment. "The inmates, of course, will never have the same economic freedom or freedom of action as me. But their experience of freedom will be different and far greater than anything I can ever experience. A kind of freedom that only people who have been held captive can experience. In that respect, you might even envy them." It appeared to dawn on them that his ideas were badly expressed. He smiled and tried to put things right. "The more you think of freedom as a term, the more difficult it becomes," he said. "In our thoughts, it can be very far-reaching because our thoughts are free, aren't they? even if all religions insist that we should avoid sinful thoughts. That makes it easy to restrict your freedom. We create our own prison. I try to let my thoughts float freely, to be a free thinker in every possible way. It often ends up with clumsy statements, though. Did you and Kerr talk about what he'd done? Stiller asked. No, but it wasn't as if I didn't know about it. After all, I followed the court case. He looked from Stiller to Wisting. It was sheer chance that I was the one assigned to Kerr as a befriender, he explained. It wasn't by my request, just to make that clear. As a befriender, you have to be of spotless character. No doubt you've already checked me out. You probably also know about my father. Wisting shook his head. My father was a prisoner in Ila, Tew explained. I was never allowed to visit him when I was little. You might think it odd that I visit other inmates there now. I can see that, but that's just how it is. Straightening up, he darted a glance at some red figures on one of the computer screens. What I can say is that Kerr and I have had some interesting conversations, but he never spoke to me about trying to escape. When were you there last? Last week. What did you talk about then? Well, we spoke about atonement and reconciliation, among other things, but nothing of what he said gave any indication of his plans for escape. Did he ever ask you to do any favors for him? Not Kerr. Other prisoners I visit have asked me to bring in food from McDonald's or Pepe's Pizza. That's about the only thing that's allowed, but Kerr has never asked me for anything. Has he never asked you to take anything out of prison for him? No. Has the name Theo Derman ever been mentioned? Tew rubs the warts on his cheek again, but this could scarcely be interpreted as recognition of the name. In the end, he shook his head. Who is that? He asked. Just a name that's cropped up. I see. No one I know, anyway. They posed a number of further questions before asking Tew to go through his own movements in the past few days. He had mainly been at home. He had had a cleaning firm in the house and had received a few food deliveries at the door, but apart from that, only his computers could provide him with an alibi. Sorry, I can't help you, he said, getting to his feet. I hope you find him. He walked them to the door. It was still raining. A fine mist of condensation covered the inside of the windscreen on their return to the car, and Wisting turned the fan on full blast. Retching off his jacket as he settled in the driver's seat. What do you think? He asked, glancing up at the man who stood at the top of the steps. I think we should put surveillance on him. Chapter 35. The phone rang on the hands-free set. The caller gave a long-winded preamble before introducing himself as Terje Nordbo, Chief Inspector in Internal Affairs. Wisting knew who he was. They had met in unfavorable circumstances several years earlier, when Wisting had been accused of fabricating evidence in a homicide case. At that time, it had seemed as if Nordbo had decided in advance that Wisting was guilty, but Wisting had been the one who had emerged from the case with his head held high. It concerns Tom Kerr's evasion of justice and a possible case of police misconduct, the internal investigator continued in a formal tone. I understand from your chief of police that you will make yourself available for interview. Wisting glanced across at Stiller, but did not reveal that he was not alone in the vehicle. Fine, he replied. I might be able to see you at the end of the week. We're in Larvik now and would prefer this to be expedited today, Nordbo said. I thought your police chief had acquainted you with the matter? I see, Wisting replied. He could be back in Larvik in an hour and a half, but had no wish to hurry as he had other priorities. I'm in Bayroom now, busy with various matters, but should be able to be with you at 4 o'clock. That gave him a few hours' breathing space. Then we'll make that an appointment, Nordbo replied. We're staying at the Hotel Farisbat. He ended the conversation and looked over at Stiller again. Have you heard anything from them? He asked. No, but I'm probably the one they should blame, Stiller answered. They'll gather other statements first and take me last. Standard police tactics. The phone rang again. This time it was Semmelman. I'm on my way to a meeting with the investigation group that has responsibility for Nana Tormer's murder, he said. I think it would be useful all round if you're in on it. Where and when? Wisting asked. The police station in Lillestrøm, Semmelman replied. 2 p.m. Wisting glanced quizzically at Stiller. He nodded, indicating that he was keen to attend too. Then we'll see you there, he said, wrapping up the call. They had to drive through Oslo to the other side of the city, and there were queues of traffic before Wisting emerged onto the ring road. By the time they had parked in front of the police station, they were a quarter of an hour late. A police officer at the front desk escorted them to one of the upper floors, where 6 investigators sat around a massive conference table waiting for them. A woman in her 40s rose from a chair at the end of the table. Reidun Koksvik, she said, introducing herself as the leader of the investigation. Wisting sat down on a spare seat beside Semmelman, and Stiller installed himself on the opposite side. They conducted a brief round of introductions before Wisting gave an account of his case. He avoided mentioning the abortive surveillance on Tom Kerr, and merely stated that they had found a summer cabin where he had changed clothes and stolen the keys to a boat. Do you have anything to suggest who has helped him? Koksvik asked. Wisting explained about the letters that Lone Melberg had smuggled out. Theo Derman, one of the investigators repeated. That sounds like a false name. Wisting cocked his head. What did you say? He asked. The young investigator had a West Norwegian accent. Wisting had actually caught what he had said, but it contained something that resonated with him. That it must be some kind of alias, the investigator explained. Even if the name isn't listed in the population register, it may well be on a mailbox somewhere. The address isn't genuine either, Wisting said. There is no Anton Breksvej in Oslo. He made a note to check with Hammer about how far they had reached with their inquiries at the postal service. Reidun Koksvik thanked him for his report and launched into an account of the Nana Tormel murder case. It has significant similarities with the murders of which Kerr was convicted, and to some extent Tara Norum's disappearance also, she said. That has led us to consider the possibility that the other one is behind it. She called up a picture of the murder victim on the large screen on the wall. Wisting recognized it from the extensive media coverage. Blonde hair surrounding an oval face with blue eyes, freckles and full lips. Nana Tormel, 22 years of age, Koksvik announced. She worked at a cafe bar in Universitetsgata in Oslo, lived with her mother. The next image was taken from a CCTV camera at the railway station. The time given in the corner indicated that it was taken on 14 July at 01:47. This is the last picture we have of her, Koksvik said. She left this hanging for a moment as she changed to a satellite photograph. Nana Tomer's apartment was marked, and a dotted line showed her most likely walking route. The distance from the railway station was given as 732 meters, but as the crow flies, it was shorter. We've no sightings after this relevant to the case. Cooksvik went on. We've charted movements and vehicle traffic in the area, analyzed phone traffic, and collected whatever CCTV footage was available. It hasn't brought us any further forward. She gazed at her colleagues around the table as if to check whether any of her investigators had any comments to make. 6 weeks ago, a severed right arm was found in a forest in Opengard, between Gjersjø Lake and Bunnefjord. Her account was illustrated with a map on the screen. Further searches were initiated, and more body parts were found, and eventually also the place where the body parts had been buried. Some had been damaged by having been dug up and dragged away by animals. A number of photographs followed, including of fragments of rope around ankles and wrists. Close-ups showed the same knot used on all the ropes. Rope with identical knots was found on the 2 bodies in the woods behind Tom Kerr's property. Reidun Cooksvik continued. No biological traces were found. The body parts had been cleaned with liquid chlorine, internally and externally. Stiller had already imparted all the information given by the investigation leading to Wisting. However, Wisting had never seen these photographs before. "What are those marked on the thigh?" he asked, pointing at the on-screen image. Along one thigh, 2 faint diagonal lines were visible, where the skin was darker than the rest. Reidun Cooksvik nodded as if to acknowledge his observation. "There are similar marks on other body parts," she replied. The technicians believe that after dismemberment, the body parts were placed in plastic storage boxes with grooves on the base that were then filled with chlorine. The parts that lay on the bottom have various impressions from these grooves. "Have you managed to trace the kind of storage boxes that were used?" "They're most likely from a Swedish manufacturer called SmartStore," Cooksvik replied. "In Norway, they're sold at Europris discount stores as well as other outlets. The distance between the grooves suggests that 70-liter boxes were used." "He must have used 2 or 3 at least," the investigator with the West Norwegian accent added. "We have an ongoing project in which we're tracing everyone who has brought these containers in the past 12 months, but that depends on them being members of a customer loyalty scheme or paying by bank card." Wisting nodded as he leafed through his note. "There's one thing about this discovery site that's different from the way Taya Polden and Salva Haddad were buried," Semmelman commented. "They were buried deep in the ground, almost a meter down in boogie land. In this case, the body parts were buried in such a shallow grave that animals have been able to drag them out." One of the investigators, previously silent, now spoke up. "The earth here is much harder than in Svartskog," he explained, "with a lot of roots. It's far more difficult to dig a deep grave, and he was on his own this time. Besides, there was minimal risk even if she was found. He knew the chlorine treatment worked. There was no reason to fear that the police would isolate DNA if the body was found." "Did you search for other bodies in the area?" Wisting asked. Reidun Cooksvik gave him a questioning look. "I'm thinking of Taran Norum," Wisting explained. "She's never been found." He reminded them, "If it's the same killer, he may well have hidden her in the same area." A search for trace evidence was conducted with sniffer dogs in the land around the discovery site, but it didn't uncover anything. The discussion around the table continued. the investigators talking enthusiastically and coming up with varied suggestions. Wisting was watching the clock. He would have to drop Stiller off at Krippel's headquarters before driving back to Larvik, and his appointment was Internal Affairs. The meeting was brought to a close with an agreement to share any information and progress made. The rain had stopped by the time they moved outside, but grey clouds still hung low in the sky. "You won't make your appointment with Internal Affairs," Stiller pointed out when they took their seats in the car. "They can wait," was Wisting's terse reply. Terse, using few words devoid of superfluity. Superfluity, excess, oversupply. Terse, short, brisk. Terse, also smoothly elegant, polished. Synonyms include compact, brief, crisp, concise. Terse. "They can wait," was Wisting's terse reply.